to another episode of Parallel Barking.
Woof woof.
Woof. All right, so
Yeah, we're gonna be barking at you.
we be barking. I feel like this is deja vu.
All over again, as Yogi Berra used to say. All right, so what's on tap for today?
We've got a spicy one. It has been proclaimed that reported, thank you, that China is sending its newest most advanced fighter aircraft, the J-20, to patrol the East and South China Seas, which are known to be disputed or contentious.
Yay for the Chengdu J-20.
Yeah. So
developed by China's Chengdu Aerospace Corporation and the People's Liberation Army. It's been around for about 10 years in development. Hooray.
Yeah, and it started.
We've all known about this.
Yes, and this is great.
Not we, but
brilliant.
Someone.
Yes, this is brilliant.
Okay, so why is this news?
So this is news.
And why are you interested?
I'm interested. Well, I think everybody should be interested.
Why? Because the our plumed parrots from the publishing universe situated somewhere in Park Avenue have decided that this is something for you to digest at the moment?
Not quite.
You see where I'm about to go critical on this, but let's take it one step at a time.
Yes. I actually think that it's one part of what I thought was most interesting about this announcement was the fact that the engines in the J-20s are now being domestically produced. And they're twin engines instead of being produced in Russia. So now China is becoming more.
All right, bingo. That is actually probably the only interesting part of the story, although it's not a story for today. It's a story for maybe at least a little bit longer than that. But yes.
What?
No. I mean, look, we all, the peasants, that's you and me and everyone else who doesn't have high security clearance or is not in the security game, we're always going to be the last to know. So this is stuff that has been in development. It's not anything having to do with us. It's just that this kind of information gets fed when those with the authority to control the information decide it's time to feed it through whatever press media they tend to use for these purposes. So when we finally get it, and then you'll see, like in this case, all of a sudden, 5,000 press organs are reporting this all at once, and they kind of all then cut and paste from each other for about a week, and then it disappears. That reflects a decision that has been made somewhere, either by the agency or the organizations that are responsible for this, or, because this is an interesting dynamic, by their competitors in competing agencies, including in intelligence agencies, who believe that this is a grand time to spread the story, right? And we're not sure which is which in this case, but that is a critically important part, precisely because, interestingly enough, this announcement comes just in the middle of the Russo-Ukrainian war.
I was like, wow, the timing of this is just precious, isn't it?
But it's buried. I mean, that's what makes this really interesting. So the story is ostensibly about the Chinese, and again, this should be a non-story. So China has these enormous claims to the 9-dash line, and they've got claims, all longstanding claims, highly disputed. The West absolutely positively has been disputing this forever, but they've got claims which they've been making for a while, both to the East China Sea and the South China Sea. It doesn't take more than 3 or 4 brain cells to figure out that if they've got this claim and they've been spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build these islands and then to trumpet their claims all over the place, that they aren't going to use their frontline machinery in order to advance to the extent they can without provoking a hot war, right?
Right.
To advance these claims. So what are they going to use? They're going to use the Kon-Tiki and tourist cruise ships to or helicopters to advance their claim? Of course, no. This is a high profile thing. They're going to want to use, at least, even just for photo ops, they're going to want to appear to be aggressively defending the claims that they're making, not aggressively enough so that, I mean, you're going to come close. And these are the kind of games that the Americans and the Soviets used to play. The Americans and the Chinese have played this game, and everyone else. And there you go. So it's news, but not news.
Yeah, this is more peacocking, and
but the Russian thing is really important because one of the most interesting things I think that's going on here now is, and for those of you who follow my work, you know that as part of the Coalition for Peace and Ethics project on post-global empire, we've been looking at and trying to conceptualize what is emerging from the debris pit, which is that extraordinary moment between 1945 and maybe 2013 to 2016, when the world appeared to be moving towards a singular converging multi-state non-polar system of highly integrated and converging globalization. That's all gone, and on the rubble heap that is what's left of this stuff. We've got an interesting, not an abandonment of globalization, but an emergence of post-global imperial structures, not 19th or 20th century empire, but empires grounded in the control of production chains. And in the process, you don't have territorial claims, you have sophisticated systems of functionally distinct or functionally differentiated dependencies, right? With the superior, the hub of these spoke dependency empires being, of course, Beijing and Washington. In Washington, if they can hold it, and that's a different podcast, and on a happy one from my perspective.
no.
But that's at least a theory we're advancing.
I know this is all giving me heart palpitations right now.
Oh, because you like it or because you hate it? This is scary times.
I know, because I'm scared, because I'm nervous.
And so if all of this is true, then there are huge transformations, and the biggest objects of transformations on the wrong end of transformation are the Europeans on the one hand, that will become, and of course, we're going to have a lot of face saving, so no one is ever going to say this, right? The first rule of post-global empire is that no one talks about post-global empire. It's a horrible reference to the movie, right?
You're terrible.
But, right, so first order dependency, it's this transformation of what had been leading states, and in this case, the Europeans in the form of their union, and the Russians as heir to the Soviets, their transformation from first tier to first tier dependencies of apex states. And the Americans have been very careful, not because they've intended this, but because of their ineptitude has made this possible. But again, that's yet another podcast. But the Russians, the Russian-Chinese relationship is one where, and this goes back, of course, to a lot of Chinese communist resentments back from the time in the 20s and 30s with versions of racism and all of this. When the Soviets first came to organize or to quote unquote help their poor Chinese brethren to help organize the Communist Party in China, this notion of China being the little brother to the great hegemonic Soviet Union and its empire. And now
I don't think anybody thinks that anymore.
No one thinks, period. But now they ought to be thinking, and if they did think about it, the tables are turning.
Absolutely. If nobody's if they're not seeing that, it's ridiculous. But I think maybe Putin does, and I think maybe that's why he's going nuts.
I think I cannot get into that man's head, nor do I want to, and it doesn't really matter. What's important geopolitically is going to outlast these frail human husks that appear to be running history, but are actually there they're playing roles, the constraints on which they can't help. I mean, they're there to play a role. Probably any sucker could have done it. He's going to put his own stamp on it, for which he may wind up on the dock in The Hague, facing war crimes one way or another.
Well,
But that's a different, again, that's a different podcast. But here, the main point of all of this, right, which goes back to, wow, they're now using Chinese rather than Russian engines, is that in fact that is meant to be, and the Chinese are very symbolic, that's meant to be symbolic of the revolution, the turning in the nature of the relationship. And not just, this is, I mean, highly symbolic, because this is meant to suggest not just this, but actually the entire tenor of the relationship between the Russians and, which is good news, bad news, right? It's
like, this is a statement. This is a huge statement. Isn't anybody else seeing this?
Right. And so, well, no, because everyone is seeing these advanced jet planes flying around the East and South China Seas, and everyone is going, oh, lordy, lordy, except we've all known about these jets, not, certainly since 2011. We've known about their modifications since 2017-18, and these new modifications that have come out in the last couple of years. None of this is a shock to the military community, nor is their use a shock, although it's been very useful for the American military, because now they can test out their pilots and their strategy. And there's been a lot of discussion about that as the Americans and the Chinese planes come head to head, and they do their little plane, like birds doing mating dances to test each other out.
What my dad is referencing is when about a month ago, the F-35s and the F-22s had a little run-in with each other with the J-20s.
A run-in, a ballet. This is aerial ballet, aerial intelligence gathering, both in terms of the ability of the pilots and the capabilities of the machinery. Right. And yeah, and that's what they did.
It was a good chance to see how they would perform, not only the machinery, but also the pilots.
Right. So that was one interesting thing, but there are a couple of others that are worth considering. The first is that, one, it should be no shock that, so one way of looking at this is looking at the China-Russia connection. The other way of looking at this is the extended ballet between the Chinese and the Americans. And here, what I'm referencing is it makes perfect sense for the Chinese to trot these jets out now, or rather to trot these jets out and then have the Americans report on it now, going, oh my goodness, what a shock. Of course, it's no shock to anyone, except that's how they want to play it in the press. And our press organs are more than happy to play along as long as it suits them. But actually, this makes perfect sense, since as a Chinese response, not to American military provocations, which have remained at a fairly constant level, so no surprise there. But what irritated the Chinese more than anything else is something that went completely under the radar, which is the January 2002 report that was supposedly widely circulated, at least among the 5 people who are interested in this in the US, from the US Department of State. This, what in the diplomatic circles would be a kind of brutally blunt repudiation of virtually all of the Chinese maritime claims to the South China Sea.
Wait, 2002 or 2022?
2022, January 2022.
Oh,
right. So the Americans have come out, and again, no surprise, but not the State Department, an official publication.
Yeah, no.
Effect,
you're not supposed to write that down.
Oh, sure you are. But and I would have expected it, and as an American strategist, I would have expected this. And I would have expected it much better. From the American perspective, they were actually quite restrained. This was buried in a publication from the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs of the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs of the US State Department. So, in a sense, it was really buried. And that no hoity-toity Park Avenue reporter from the New York Times is going to bother with this third or fourth or fifth tier level down publication from the State Department because you can't get a halfway decent cocktail party from this.
Yeah.
So it was kind of buried, but there it was. But it was as clear as a bell, and so one would have expected some kind of Chinese response. The Chinese, of course, are going to respond in the usual way. They'll have some spokesperson.
Wait,
from
aren't
Foreign
you
Ministry who'll
required to
say
have
yes to you. What?
a unified message on all of your memoranda?
Oh, please, no. Where have you been? No. That's not how very large bureaucracies work for any number of reasons. That's another podcast. Sometimes you want to cultivate chaos because then you can disavow. Sometimes you need a little bit of craziness.
Well, why do I always get
and
slapped on
sometimes
the
it's just
wrist?
crazy land. What?
But why do I always get slapped on the wrist for not following through on the?
Because because of the nature of the asymmetries of the power relationships in which your hand is out and someone else is doing the slapping.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
We're all in that boat, and none of us are at the core of leadership of any place. So yeah, we're on the wrong end of that stick. But the point is,
Anywho.
right, so from that perspective, that the J20 thing makes sense. The Chinese are also quite proud of their of what they believe is their advancement. You have to look at it from Chinese internal perspective. They have the two development policy that came in during COVID, and the Chinese needed to, they made all of this, these statements and claims about how their own internal domestic technologically driven economy was going to be able to stand on their own so that they couldn't be bullied by sanctions. Read in here possible sanctions against the Chinese for running their Russian puppets, or at least financing or facilitating this war of aggression in the Ukraine, right? But they can stand alone, and now you've got proof at the highest level of military weapons productions. There is a little bit of noise in the background about how some of this was actually technology that was stolen from the Americans, but that would not be a surprise. I mean, you can't avoid that. All right, so you've got the Chinese internal, you've got this continuing quote unquote dialogue between the Chinese and the Americans as they begin to more or less solidify the structures, habits, relationships, communications between these two emerging post-global imperial centers. You've got the China-Russia thing and its repercussions for the Russo-Ukraine war. So this gets more and more interesting. And then the last thing, which is closest to your heart that I can think of off the spur of the moment, is you got the Japanese.
Yes.
And in a sense, there's a bit, I mean, I understand why the Chinese might do it because they don't care about the Japanese. But every time someone doesn't care about the Japanese, it's always a painful lesson when the Japanese finally rouse themselves and make themselves unavoidably present, present, right? And so from their perspective, you know, they needed to do all of this stuff with the J20s. It makes perfect sense. But of course, they're also frightening the Japanese. And the Japanese, of course, have their finger in the East China thing directly. They have
with the
somewhat less directly in the peripheries of the South China Sea, but the Japanese are also at the front line with the Quad of redeveloping what is now the post-global version of the late 19th and early 20th century East Asian co-prosperity sphere under the influence now not of Japan, but of Japan/Washington and Canberra. So it's all cool, right? This is a post-global rather than the old-fashioned way of doing it. And the Japanese have their own interests to protect, and the Americans have now finally, after a hugely long period of time, have now kind of loosened the leash. And this will certainly spur the Japanese self-defense forces to develop.
I mean, and that had started.
Oh yeah.
A few years ago.
Right. And all self-defense, of course, but we're going to define self-defense now increasingly more broadly. And so chances are we're going to see a much greater, although again, under the table, the Japanese and the Japanese press at least in some matters, remain far more discreet than what passes for the press in the West. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. In this case, it means that a lot of Japanese developments will go under the radar. But expect this to spur, and you're absolutely right, the Japanese have already been spurred, but this is just going to keep, it will be a reminder that this is a valuable trajectory for them to continue.
Well, yeah, I think the alliance has already been reaffirmed just recently between the US and Japan. I think
But it's
maybe
Japanese technological innovation here. And remember that actually probably even better than the Americans, the Japanese are really light years ahead of most people on robotics.
Absolutely.
And robotics may have military applications that we certainly, because the Americans can't keep their mouth shut and can't keep a secret for the most part. They can when they absolutely need to, but there's so many secrets that it will tend, the risk of it bleeding out is larger. Moving this down to Japan and out of the US may enhance both the wow and the surprise factor when things have to occur. But that's certainly well beyond my pay grade, and I am mindlessly speculating here, and I know I'm wrong.
That would be an interesting pathway to go down.
It might be. So what else do you take away from this?
That we are living in precarious times. I forgot who recently said it.
Yeah, but that's sort of banal. Of course, we live in precarious times, but more specifically, what do you take away from this? Assuming that we live in precarious times, well, we're just going to have to take a deep breath.
I think that, to me right now, the US looks like we are standing still, and
we ought not to be,
and we ought not
this
to
is
be.
a good thing.
And
Okay.
we should be moving forward, and everyone else around us is doing that, and we're being left behind.
So how would you want us to move forward? Do you have something in mind, or just at this point, anything will do? At least with respect to the J20 situation.
With respect to the J20 situation, I think it's a bit of a sit and wait kind of thing, and any type of
come on, let's be more ambitious. Let's be more ambitious. So
why do you say that? I mean,
we're speculating, right? And we're seeing what's going on. And so I'm thinking, I'm writing on a blank slate. If we are deeply committed to the preservation of American interests and its reconstitution as the apex, one of the apex
then I would hope that our
powers.
technology would already be 10 times better than what is in the J20. And if it's not, it should be number one on the list.
Okay, I would agree with that. But come on, let's be more ambitious. Let's think big. So here would be a couple of things. You want to be really ambitious. You want to play. I think the Chinese have shown us the way, and we should take the Chinese path.
Spies in institutes. Spies?
No. That's the 20th century. No, the Chinese, like I said, they've led the way. No, we should be building islands like crazy in the South China and East China Sea. And we should be building islands there that have, no, we don't have islands there. We believe that it is all open. And we can still take the position that the East China Sea or the South China Sea is completely international. And to that end, we will be
Like
building,
an international space station, but an
very good,
internet. Oh
very
my
good. To be
God.
building that and invite a reaction. And we would be doing this through the Quad. We would tell the UN to come in, and then we would invite the navies of all countries, including the Chinese, to come and visit this port as to show its international character.
Oh
So the trick is
my
not to leave
God,
the
I
Chinese
love
out,
it.
not to leave the Chinese out, but to invite them in so that everyone now has a vested, every country's navy has a vested interest in protecting the open waters of the South China Sea. And then, as the Chinese would tell us, we can then engage in dialogue to talk about quite justified security concerns,
And
quite
to
justified
safeguard
mutual benefit for the exploitation of resources,
and
but
the
everyone
airspace
gets
and security of maritime interests.
right, and everyone gets to participate. So why the Americans are not building these islands? The Japanese, the Chinese have shown us what to do, but of course, Americans and our American leadership are stuck somewhere between the late 19th and early 20th century,
Right.
or worse, they're so blinded by their domestic ideologies and their little people bubble-shaped domestic ideologies which they're projecting abroad, that they cannot see anything past whatever it is that they think will get them past
The
whatever nasty
traditional.
focus group they're looking at.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be one thing. There are others, but you have to pay me to tell you.
Oh,
So what do you think about that?
I really like it, but I think one thing to add, that once we bring everybody to the meeting on the islands, that's when we introduce all of our super souped up planes, jets.
You never introduce them, not until it's time for them to be used.
Oh, so you want to be all
Well, there's no point. The Chinese security services,
surprise.
yes, the Chinese security services will already know. So unless there's a propaganda value to describe it, and that's is certainly what the Chinese and the Americans have traditionally done, they'll develop what they develop. They will either express surprise or they'll express a need to catch up, meaning that they use this to squeeze more money out of their legislatures, or there are all kinds of reasons, strategic reasons for managing information of that kind. And so but that's again yet another podcast. But to have it available is one thing. To decide the best way of using that information in the management of mass opinion, both domestically and international, is a very different thing.
So do you think that the Chinese got what they wanted out of this interaction?
It's hard to tell. I'm not sure what the Chinese want. I can tell you what I read in the from the party organs and from the state organs and the foreign ministry. What the Chinese are looking to do is what they've already told us over and over again, right? There's no secrets here. The Chinese are being about as transparent as they possibly can be about what they want. Part of it is respect. Part of it is to significantly influence the shape and scope, not just of international discourse, but the way in which international discourse is then operationalized. And part of it is to make these good on these specific claims to these geographies.
Mm-hmm.
And then part of it is, of course, with the Russo-Ukrainian war, is to see whether, to what extent they can actually do what they think they're going to have to do in order to be an apex post-global imperial center. Because there's also an experiment, just like the sequestration of 20-something million people in Shanghai for COVID quarantine, which is yet another podcast, right? All of this is new. It's all being tested out. And it's not clear. So everyone is experimenting as we transition. And so part of what the Chinese are probably doing and experimenting is, to what extent is this working? What has to be reshaped? How is this reacting? What risks do they bear? And not just here, but for example, with respect to the control and viability of their Belt and Road Initiative and their management of global production chains, to what extent can they use this to penetrate the competitor production chain and territories, i.e. the Americans and the Europeans.
Well, see, and that's what I
So it gets
appreciate.
complicated.
That's what I appreciate about the Chinese is their ingenuity right now. I feel like that's what Americans have lost at this point. I feel like not Americans, but I feel like that sense. I feel like the leadership or where we are at this point.
Never look. This all right. And so here's my only caution. I am sympathetic to what you're saying, but here's a caution, and it's a caution we used to make when the Chinese were still working through their own psychosis during the, for example, during the Cultural Revolution period. Don't sell very large.
I know it's not great to generalize.
Yeah, no. Don't sell them short because they are temporarily in some kind of mental breakdown stage, right? And the Americans right now are being pursued by any number of demons from their own past, from their conception of the future, and a huge internal civil strife over who gets to lead, right? Who the leading factions are, and how that's all going to pan out.
How long do we allow that to last? How long should that last?
Well, I have no idea. No one has any idea. It's certainly for another 3 or 4 years, which is why the Chinese probably are being quite aggressive right now.
Right.
Because they know that if
that makes me uncomfortable.
If they don't do it now, when are they going to do it? They're certainly not going to be able to do it when the Americans come back into their own, right? And the Chinese, and it's not clear how long the Chinese can stay in their own before they also begin to have their own internal problems. It doesn't mean that they become less than they are, but it means that sometimes these large states get distracted. Ours is distracted.
Yeah, it's just frustrating to see what I perceive as weak leadership. That's what I'm saying.
Well, now you're getting political. I never take political positions.
Oh, and I do. So everybody, if you would like some political.
Well, no, bring it on. I will not agree or disagree. I will just take a more nuanced and equivocal.
He's afraid. He is afraid. Everyone.
No, it's just history. What is it from that book series? The Wheel of Time writes and then moves on. And so I tend to like to take the long view of things, because
you never want to be wrong.
Yeah, but I'm never right either. So there you go. No, yes, American leadership right now is undergoing a period of great stress. We are at an inflection point in resolving the huge central contradictions of American progress that have to be identified, met, and overcome before we can move from the old to the next era of American development. Once we do, watch out, but we're in that horrible period of contradiction, as the Chinese were for a long time, as they will again at some point, as we will again.
Yeah, and it's just a frustrating place to be. It's just frustrating to be here.
But beyond that, I won't go into the details about the personal failings of any number of people, institutions, and the like, because that will take us through about 20 podcasts.
Well, that's why I was just vague in saying leadership. Okay, so anyway, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, this is a very interesting conversation, and thank you for bringing it up. At some point, it might be fun to take rides on the what is it, the F-35s and the J-20s and compare them.
Yes, maybe one day.
I will ever do that, but yeah.
Yeah, although I think I would definitely end up throwing up on myself. So.
Well, certainly
it might be worth it.
If you weren't going to, the pilots who would be our guides would certainly think it would be funny to make us do that.
Yes.
So I'd make sure not to have eaten for 2 days before I got in one of those things.
All right, just bile then would become.
There you go. Hey.
Yeah. All right. Well, fellow parallel barkers, we will see you next time.
All right, and write in and. Barker Fellows, if you've got an idea or you want us to talk about something, please email us. We'd be happy to take it on.
parallelbarkingpodcast@gmail.com.
All right. Woof, woof.
We'll be waiting.